There's a lot to be anxious about, fearful of, the winds and seas kicking around us. Do I send my kids back to school? Well, what if they don't get socialized enough? But what if they have long-term effects or catch this very contagious virus? What's happening at work? They're laying people off. They're saying we're going to work online, but they're going to cut some positions because business is different and not per usual. We worry about the imminent beginnings of election debates and what's going to happen. I don't care what your politics are today. There's fears. Fears about where are we headed? Because everything seems to be in upheaval around us. Environmental concerns, social unrest, political unhinging, and rhetoric. And where are we in the storms? We like the safety of something to hold on to in the boat, something solid, the known. It's hard to be in the unknown. Long before the invasion of Poland, as early as the early 1930s, 33, 34, Dietrich Bonhoeffer began to warn fellow Christians, people in his church, people in his clergy groups, about some of the insidious nature of Himmler and Goebbels and Hitler. The fears they were stoking, the scapegoating on Jews and gypsies and professors and communists, anyone who would speak out and challenge or question the way that some people were being portrayed in the new, more prosperous, more economically and militarily viable Germany. But Bonhoeffer said there's something dark that's being fueled here. And of course, the Nazi Party took rise to power in strengthening its place in Germany's leadership. And in doing so, right after war broke out in 1942, just a year and a half into the war, Bonhoeffer was able to go overseas. Now, he had been already critical. The SS was watching him and his family and his peers who were part of the confessing church, who began to say, only 20%, by the way, of all German churches, who were beginning to say, as Christian followers of Jesus of Nazareth, what are happening to citizens of our state, people disappearing to camps, people being beaten in the middle of the night, people being humiliated in the streets and paraded about, these are not the politics of Jesus. And so he began to step out of the boat into the storm and the unknown. But in 1942, he was allowed to travel to London to speak, and he began to warn his fellows in universities and in seminaries and in the public at large. They are building camps. They are sending people to these camps. They are not coming home. Anybody who has another opinion, anybody who speaks a different truth than the one that the state is giving, is gone. And they said, Dietrich, stay here in London where it's safe. Then he went to the States. He rubbed shoulders with the Niebuhr brothers, two that are very strong in our own tradition. They said, Dietrich, imagine what you could do in ministry here. Don't go back to Germany. It is so dangerous. You will be taken away. And Dietrich Bonhoeffer, in the midst of the storm, listening to the voice of Christ, said this: when Christ calls me to come and follow, I die to myself. I am no longer my own, but a servant of the living God and my Lord. How can I be part of the rebuilding of my Germany that I love to a new day, to a new sunrise, if I do not also, along with my countrymen, bear our darkest hours and suffering rather than watching it unfold from afar in the safety and security of being removed? He returned, and just months after his return, Bonhoeffer, his mother, his father, his brothers, and his sister were all taken. And 5 days in 1945, 5 days before his prison camp was liberated, Bonhoeffer was executed. By the by, there are stories from prisoners who survived the camp of Bonhoeffer granting communion not only to fellow prisoners and prayers across faith lines, but also to his captors and Nazi soldiers, offering a place to them who were his enemies at the table. When we read this text in Matthew's Gospel of Peter and the disciples, the 12 of them, fishermen, known to be around lakes and water. These guys were experienced, but here is a time where their lives are threatened. The storm is so great that they're afraid that the boat, in being swamped, will sink and they will die. And then they see this figure, what is that out on the water? It's a ghost. It's bad enough we're going to die out here. Now something demonic is out there. We are in big trouble. And they hear this voice. It's me. Peter says, Lord, if it's you, call me out on the water. And he does. He leaves the safety of the boat. I wonder, amidst all the storms of our lives, all the places where we are afraid, it could be something tangible, the news, things that are happening in the world. It could be, though, something in your own life. Afraid, I've never sung in a choir. I've never worked with teens. I've heard this again and again. I've never gone on a mission trip. I don't think I could serve in that way. I don't know that I have those gifts. But you know what? Oftentimes those things are just masking. It's safe just to kind of do my normal routines. It's safe to kind of just be obscure and not push myself to hear where you might be leading me that's not in my wheelhouse or comfort zone, but it may be some buried gifts you've given me. And what would it mean for me to trust you and step out, God, and obey in a place that's, the ground isn't so solid, but I know you've got me. Right after my first call, I was looking for my second church that I would serve, and I had several calls that were good calls. How do you put it that way? They seemed to fit my skill set and things, but then there was this one. It was a small, dying church in the urban ring of Cleveland. There was 35 members on a Sunday. That was a good Sunday. And I think they had about 60 members and a whole, maybe 70 as a church. It was about a quarter of what I had been making before. In other words, I had a lot of people around me saying, Scott, you're going from preaching to 250 to 30? You considering giving up 3? What about your young family? Aren't you going to support them? What else are you good at? You going to go cook or clean dishes? What else are you going to do? Because you can't just do that. But and everybody around me saying, this is just not a good career move for me. And I said, yeah, all those things make sense. All those things are safe. But I really felt like the Spirit of the living God was saying, go to that one. It makes no sense. Everybody's counseling me, nah. And you know what, brothers and sisters, you know what, friends? I played it safe. I wish I could tell you, I took the dying church where I felt led. I took a different church call, and I learned a lot. It was a good call. God taught me a lot in that moment, but I really always wonder, what would it have been like if I really stepped out, way out of my comfort zone, way out of what everybody else was telling me, and I took a a plunge, a sink or swim, or maybe a little bit of both. And so I ask you today, because I think it's not an either or, as Pastor Michelle often says, it's not an either or, it is a both and. In the storm, Peter's both afraid of sinking when he takes his eyes off of Christ. There are fears he's worried about even before he steps out, but there's also this trust and this possibility. What would it be like to walk on the waves with Jesus? What would it be like to trust him in those ways and see God working in these ways that I am so aware I can't do on my own? And I know God's got me in that. How powerful would that be? So what is it in your life that keeps you and I clinging to the sides of the known, to the safety of the boat, to the solidness under our feet, and makes us afraid? Those excuses, those rationalizations, those fears that keep us from stepping into something with God that might be far more abundant, far more life-giving, that lift us in ways that we've never felt before, with possibilities beyond anything we could imagine in our lives. I said that Jesus had, you'll find this text in most of the Gospels, but as Pastor Michelle, when she read, said, this is the only time when Peter is a part of the story, where there's this walking on water that occurs. Jesus has left the disciples to dismiss the crowds. He's gone up to pray alone. I suspect he needs to kind of recharge the batteries. But he also commands them into the boat and go to the other side where I've sent you. As they're out in this storm, as I mentioned, he walks out to them in the sea. Mark says he was going to pass them by. That's another sermon for another day. A God revealing when God passes by Moses and God passes by Elijah in the Old Testament. They see something about God in the moment. But Matthew doesn't include that. He says Jesus is walking towards them. They think it's a ghost. And here's a critical piece of the text. Peter says, if it is you. I'm always surprised by this because Peter is probably the most impulsive guy that we see in the New Testament. I mean, let's build some booths. I'm going to cut off this guy's ear that's trying to arrest you. Peter's always talk first, think later. Act now, think later. But here in this moment, in the midst of the storms, when he, a fisherman, is afraid that this is a life or death thing, if it's you, Lord, you've commanded me into this boat, command me out of it. I need to know that this is more than just my own bravado, just my own impulses. Sometimes in church we just dive right in without thinking or praying or asking God where to go. If it's you, call me out onto the waters. Meet me in my fears and anxieties. And Jesus invites him out. There's something else in the text that bothers me. Every time I read it in English, I just want to take the page and... When Jesus speaks to the disciples, he says something that God always almost says when he meets people, and when God is present, people often tend to get a little unnerved, a little afraid. It says the disciples are terrified. It's a ghost! And he says, do not be afraid. Something that God says to God's people 366 times in the Bible. Don't be afraid, it's me. And it's not, in your English translation, it'll say, it is I. Hey guys, it's me. I got back from the mountain, the people, we were just, it's me, it's Jesus, hey. No. Bad translation. Let's just cross it out if you want. He says, ego eimi in the Greek. I am. For those of us who grew up in Sunday school, you should remember burning bush. Moses, who do I say sent me? Tell them I am who I am. The great I am sends you. When people are debating Jesus, the bread of life, he says, before there was Abraham and Jacob and Isaac, I am. It's a name. Jesus isn't just saying, hey, it's me. Left the keys in the car. No, it's me. No, he's saying, I am. The power of God is present. And because the power of God is present, And out there on the waters, Peter says, call me to you. If it's your will, call me out there, because I know you've got me. It goes without saying there's 12 of them in the boat, but only one of them, only Peter, has the courage to say, if it's you, God, call me out on the waves. I often wonder if the story had gone differently, and Peter's out in the water, and let's put ourselves in the boat. There's other 11 guys, or they're like, oh, that Peter, he's always showing off. There he is. Maybe some of them are hoping that he sinks a little bit. Yeah, let's see. 10-1, he goes under. That's why we call him Rocky. But why didn't the other 11 pile out when they see Peter out on the water? I mean, could you imagine all 12 of them going out there, playing a game out in the waves with Jesus? Only Peter knows what it is to walk on water like Jesus. The rest of them have settled for the safety of the boat. Now, it is that Jesus commanded them. Barbara Brown Taylor, who I admire greatly, preaches an interesting sermon where her take on it is that Peter is actually kind of going on his own ambitions. Jesus told him, stay in the boat. There's a time to stay in the boat during the storms. There's just time to hunker down and stay together and hold the line as people of faith. Yes? But I also like the interpretation by John Ortberg, who says, if you want to be a water walker, you got to get out of the boat. Now, fears can be crippling. Fears can hold us in. And unless we have the courage when we meet God in our prayer time or in our life, and God says, you've got to get your feet wet. You've got to meet me halfway here. It's a two-way street, this faith. It's just not praying, God, help me with this, or give me this, or give me that. God also has some expectations of us. Step out. Will you trust me into the life I've imagined for you? Will you get beyond the walls of the comfort zone? In the Old Testament, there's all kinds of neat stories like this. One in particular, where the people of Israel are coming from enslavement. They have been in the wilderness. They are carrying the Ark of the Covenant. Joshua, not Moses, because Moses has died, is leading them into the land of promise, east, and they come across the Jordan River. And the priests say, well, what do? We can't carry this ark across the river. It might fall, it might get wet, it might break, we might fall. We don't know where the rocks are. Some places it's pretty deep. And Joshua says to the priests, through God, tell the priest, step into the water, get your feet wet, and I'll provide a dry path. Did you know? Just like the Sea of Reeds in the Exodus story when they're fleeing Pharaoh's army, did you know that there are two partings of the river in Scripture? So in the book of Joshua, they get their feet wet, and God provides the path. Later in Judges, Gideon, great recruiter. He's got to face the Midianites. He's got an army of 10,000. The guy is going to outnumber the Midianites 5-1. He says, this is great, in the voice of Flounder. And as he says so, I got this. We're going to destroy these guys. We're going to mop up the floor with these Midianites. And God says, no, you got too many. Take anybody who's a new father, a new husband, anybody who's got kids at home, anybody who's afraid, send them home. So Gideon says, okay, you guys, anybody who falls in those categories, go home. We don't need you. They're down to 3,000. Gideon says, well, now it's about even, but I still like our chances. God says, no. This isn't about you, Gideon. This is about me and my relationship with my people. So you still got too many. How do you determine how many you got? Go down to the river. All right, this is a water theme today. Go down to the river. Tell all the guys to drink some water from the river. If they scoop the water with their hands and like that, kind of cup it like most normal people, then send them home. But if they get down on all fours and kind of lap it like dogs, who drinks water like that anyway? You, me, I don't know. It's a little strange. But the dog lappers, take those guys and go against the Midianites with the dog lappers, the lickers. Gideon says, really? Am I hearing you? Anyway, he does. 300 guys. Gideon says, 300 guys? This isn't going to cut it. God says, do you trust me? Can you step out of the boat? I will deliver this Midianite army to you and to the people who've forgotten me in ways that you, Gideon, and all your great recruiting couldn't do alone. It's not all about power and might and who's big enough and strong enough. It's about who you're trusting, who's got you, now and eternally. Will you step out and just trust me on this? I wonder what those 300 guys were thinking after they saw the 9,700 go home. This doesn't sound like good tactics. But God's got us, Gideon says. And sure enough, the end result is a victory for Israel. Are you willing to get your feet wet? Are you willing to meet God halfway? Fear of what others might think, fear of loss of revenue, loss of reputation, loss of career trajectory, as I had mentioned, fear of the unknown, fear of the I've never done it before, or the could have, should have, would have, fear of failure, which so many of us have. Dr. Jonas Salk, the inventor of the finalization of the vaccine for polio, was interviewed, and the interviewer said, Dr. Jonas, you created 200 different vaccines over years of your life. I mean, how did it feel to waste so much time and have so much failure? He said, I was never taught to believe in failure. What I believe is I found 200 ways not to cure polio until I found just the right one. Wayne Gretzky says it a little differently. You always miss the shots you never take in life and in faith. Gregor Lavoie, a Christian writer in Common Cold for the Soul, says, fear turns our abilities and gifts that are never cultivated or deployed until weeks run into months and months drag into years, and one day you look back at your life in a deep, intimate, gut-wrenching, honest conversations that you never had. Great, bold prayers that you never prayed. Exhilarating good news risks that you never took. Sacrificial gifts that you never had the courage to offer. Lives that you were meant to change that you never touched. And you realize that out there, looking back on a life of banality and missed opportunities, was a world in desperate need of hope and good news and this great calling of God, which God invited you to be part of something bigger than yourself. And you see the person you could have been, but never answered the calling, never got out of the boat. Now, the fears, particularly of failure, are our biggest reasons we stay in the boat. For every Peter, there's another 11 who cling to the safety and security. I wonder what is happening in your life and mine right now that could not possibly occur but for God's presence in our lives. I'm going to say that one more time. What is happening in your life and mine right now that could not be happening apart from your relationship with God? What's God doing in your life that's risky, that lets go, that tells the Holy Spirit, here I am, and means it? There are 12 in the boat. Only one steps out. True, the other 11 stay dry and warm and safe for the most part. There is a storm going on around them. But it's not affecting them much when Jesus is out there with Peter. They're okay. But they're not walking on water. And their lives will never know that feeling until they step out of the boat. How about you? as you're facing the storms today, where might God be calling you? You want to be a water walker? Just play it safe. Will there be some sinking and swimming? Sure. It's not an either or. Will we be afraid when we step out of the boat? You better believe it. There's still a storm. But who is it that's called us? And who is it that's got us? Amen.